We, of course, are celebrating Lag BaOmer, and we're finishing up this, for those who hold, as most people do, until Lag BaOmer, we're finishing up this semi-mourning period. And I was able to shave today, so that was a great relief. And we're going to spend some time talking about this whole issue of what Lag BaOmer is all about. And there are a lot of questions to ask. So let me begin by posing a few of these questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. First of all, there are many events that take place around this holiday or semi-holiday of Lag BaOmer. I say semi-holiday because it's not a major holiday with restrictions. It's not in the Torah, of course, but it has become, as we see, indicated by the crowds in Meron. Obviously, for some element of the population, it's an extremely important and popular holiday. So I want to discuss some elements of it that are somewhat confusing. First of all, is this period of the Omer between Pesach and Shavuot, is it a happy period or not? That's question number one. Question number two, when we talk about the issue of the students of Rabbi Akiva, we need to understand what happened there. Why did the students of Rabbi Akiva die? And why do we mourn them instead of, I would have thought, perhaps mourning Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva, arguably the greatest Jew or the greatest rabbi in Jewish history since Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe that would be a more appropriate thing to do, center this around mourning for Rabbi Akiva. I want to talk about the fires that are lit traditionally, less so, I think, every year for ecological reasons, but certainly still something that we see happening every Lag BaOmer. And this issue of the Rashbi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, that people center around and commemorate on Lag BaOmer in the ceremony at Har Meron with the lighting of fires, etc. What does all of this mean and how does it come together? So let me begin at the beginning. There is a period between Pesach and Shavuot. It is a special time. It links together Pesach, physical freedom, with Shavuot, in a sense, spiritual freedom. As the rabbis tell us, Ein bein chorin ela misha osek b'Torah, that freedom comes with those who follow the Torah and immerse themselves in Torah. So we're linking these two holidays. Indeed, this is one of the reasons perhaps why Shavuot is biblically just a one-day holiday. It's not as long as Pesach or Sukkot or Hanukkah, etc., because it's connected. It's the bookend with Pesach. And indeed, the date of Shavuot is not, now it's set because of our calendar, but at one time it could fluctuate. The Torah merely says, count 49 days after Pesach, you come to the 50th day, and that's Shavuot. So on this one hand, it's nothing negative and nothing sad about it. It's a chance for us to grow these 49 steps. We were at the 49th level of Tuma when we got out of Egypt. We had to progress to be able to receive the Torah. That's actually a good thing. It's a positive incentive for us to improve ourselves continually. And it was associated with the bringing of the Omer, the barley harvest, that and representing the first fruits that would be brought on Shavuot. So this is also a very festive idea and a festive time. But somewhere along the line, it turned from being something celebratory and positive to something that is, as we said, a semi-mourning period. This is something that the Gemara says and tells us that during this period of time, the 24,000 students or the 12,000 pairs of students, It's an interesting way to phrase it. We'll talk about that. The pairs of students died during this time until the plague ended on the 33rd day of the Omer. Now, we don't have any record for hundreds of years, maybe over 1,000 years, that there was any kind of commemoration until much later, when we are told weddings are not celebrated between Pesach and Shavuot, or specifically in most customs until Lag BaOmer. And then suddenly this period of time becomes concerned with the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, and this, in commemoration of their deaths, we enact these practices of no weddings, not shaving, no public music, banquets, etc., like in the laws of mourning. And some want to suggest that the impetus for instituting these, even though the Gemara talks about the cessation of weddings, it does not talk about specifically a mourning period for the whole community. Some want to link this to the events of the Crusades, when it was during this exact period of time as well, when the Crusaders, who were marching to liberate the Holy Land from the Muslims, they decimated and destroyed Jewish communities, specifically along the Rhine, and massacred many thousands of Jews. And so it was decided that put all these things together, and this would be a period of the year when it would be appropriate to go into mourning, ostensibly for the students of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara is somewhat mysterious about what happened to them. There is a statement that says that they died from a ailment which translates to croup, C-R-O-U-P, which is a kind of choking. And the Gemara says this happened because they did not show sufficient respect, zeh lazeh, one to the other. Now, the question that this raises, first of all, this is a tremendous tragedy of so many. We can imagine that the students of Rabbi Akiva were greater than any of the rabbi leaders today, any of the teachers. They may be called students, but these were, we know they were great because of the 5 sages who survived and would single-handedly lead a resurgence of Torah learning even after the death of Rabbi Akiva. But one of the questions that stands out is, we know that Rabbi Akiva is famous for his statement, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha zeh klal gadol b'Torah. Love your fellow Jew as yourself. This is the outstanding motto, we might say, of the Torah and of Judaism. Hillel will also echo this same statement, but in a negative fashion, when he says, that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. But the statement of Rabbi Akiva, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, that really is a catchphrase, a sisma, a motto for the Jewish people. So how is it that the rabbi whose entire, let's say, image, personality was built around this idea of loving other Jews as you love yourself, and yet the students of Rabbi Akiva did not follow in his footsteps and are accused of not showing enough honor one to the other? So someone to suggest maybe Rabbi Akiva said this after his students died as a way of saying, in a sense, mourning, eulogizing, and lamenting on their fate. They didn't show enough honor to each other, and therefore he came up with the statement that we have to show more compassion, more respect for one another. But still, I want to suggest that there are other possibilities to try to reconcile what happened to the students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, we know, lived, he had very similar to David HaMelech. Whatever could happen, happened to these two individuals, both in terms of the heights of glory and also the lowest depths. In the case of David, he was considered an outsider, a mamzer. He was thrown out by his own family. He was pursued by Shaul. They tried to kill him. And many other events. We're learning now in our Tanakh class each week about David HaMelech and Tehillim, perhaps the most fascinating personality in Tanakh. And later on, of course, he comes to be king and unite the nation and write Tehillim and be the singer, the poet laureate of Am Yisrael. And Rabbi Akiva too, he's poor. He grows up ignorant of Judaism, of Torah. His whole life changes when he meets the right woman, of course. Rachel is her name. She comes from a wealthy family. I think we know the story. She wants to marry him. She loves him. Her own family, very, very wealthy, among the wealthiest families in Yerushalayim. They disown her, cut her out of the will, and they live a very poor existence, but she encourages him to start studying. And ultimately, he leaves for 12 years to study. He comes back by tradition. He sees her and overhears her saying, when her neighbor is complaining, your husband has left you for so long, she says, I wish he would leave me for another 12 years if that means he can study and become a scholar. He turns around, he leaves. Ultimately, he becomes the leader, the rabbinic leader of the generation, and he gives her credit for everything, for all of the learning that he does. And he becomes this epical and unique personality in Jewish life. He then will, he's a fierce Zionist, and he lives at a time that the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed, but there is a movement to rebel against the Romans and to reestablish Jewish independence in Israel. He joins forces with Bar Kosiba, later to be known as Bar Kokhba or Bar Koziba. We're not going to get too deeply into Bar Kokhba, but he's a charismatic and powerful person who is able to assemble an army that takes on the Romans, initially successful, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, Bar Kokhba, who teams up with Rabbi Akiva to lead this rebellion, Bar Kokhba is killed, and Rabbi Akiva is captured, tortured, and murdered by the Romans. The fascinating aspect of this story is that the leadership of the Jewish people is divided. There are those who want to make an accommodation with the Romans, not to rebel, and believe that it's only going to be more destructive and counterproductive to take on the Romans and to challenge their authority. And then there are others, and these are some great people. Then there are others like Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Lezer Hamodai, etc., and Rabbi Hanania ben Teradion, one of the martyrs that we read about on Yom Kippur, who say that the Jewish people must be free. We must be independent, because living under the rule of the Romans will never allow us to fulfill the Torah as completely as we should. And this debate and this dispute goes on until ultimately the Romans crush the rebellion. It has been suggested that when the Gemara says they did not show kavod zeh lazeh, one to the other, it doesn't necessarily mean the students of Rabbi Akiva, who, by the way, according to some very credible sources, were killed not because of a disease, but because they were enlisted into the army. They were, Rabbi Akiva, as his students, joined with their rabbi. They fought in the rebellion against Rome, and that's how they died. And that's much more plausible, perhaps. We can see that. Someone to estimate that as many as 500,000 Jews were killed in the rebellion, in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. So the number 24,000, when you put it in that context, is tragic, but is a small number of the people who fought against Rome. So someone to suggest that this statement, they did not show honor one to the other, is not necessarily each student to his fellow student, but is talking about the leaders of the generation, the rabbis who argued against each other, who instead of being able to agree on a common strategy for survival, they fought one another. And there were those who said, let us sit and study Torah as much as the Romans will allow us to do and practice Judaism as much as we can, and not take a chance that we'll be wiped out. Whereas others said, no, Israel needs to be independent. Israel needs to be free. And we have to fight. If Hashem will help us and will join our struggle, we'll be able to defeat the Romans. But what tore the nation apart, and unfortunately we had seen this before with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash as well, was the internal fighting, machloket, between the Jews, both in the leadership and also in the rank and file. And that is a tragedy that includes the death of Rabbi Akiva, who was arguably the leader of that rebellion, certainly the spiritual leader. And so the mourning period is something which is appropriate. Now comes another story that is part and parcel of Sfirat HaOmer and Lag BaOmer, and that is the story of Rashbi, of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. He is the primary student of Rabbi Akiva. He's going to carry on Rabbi Akiva's leadership and influence and example after Rabbi Akiva is murdered. The 33rd day of the Omer, of course, is the Hilula, or the Yortzeit, the date of death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. By tradition, although this is, in some ways, it can be an uplifting day, but it's also mournful. By tradition, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai said to his students, do not mourn me with sadness, commemorate my death with celebration, because he revealed secrets of the Zohar, which he had learned from the Ari, Rav Yitzchak Luria. And he revealed that to his students and said, rejoice in your knowledge, the secrets that have been revealed to you. And this is one of the ideas behind the fire, that in a sense, he enlightened the world. He brought light to the world through the Kabbalah, the Zohar, which, by the way, means light. And therefore, this tradition grew up although 99% of the people don't have any idea other than engaging in pyromania, why to light fires. But this is the traditional spiritual reason that is given because of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's request to his students. But I want to tell you a little bit more about the story of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. You may know it, but it bears repeating. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, again, was one of these leaders, rabbinic leaders. And there was a debate. There were some leaders who were actually not just accommodating the Romans, but were actually close with the Romans. One of them was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The Gemara records a statement where Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, we should give credit to the Romans for some of the great things they do. They did. They're builders. They build bridges. They are able to organize these tremendous markets people can come to and buy things. They built these great bathhouses. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, he interrupts and he says, I don't give any credit to the Romans for that. These are things the Romans did for perverse reasons. They build bridges so that they can charge people a toll and make more money off poor people. They have markets where they can offer people, specifically women, prostitutes, for sale. They have bathhouses to engage in all kinds of illicit behavior. And Rav Shimon Bar Yochai takes, just like his Rabbi Akiva, takes a very strong stance against anyone who gives any kind of credit to the Romans. Well, the Romans hear about what Rav Shimon Bar Yochai has said, and they put out a warrant for his arrest. They put a price on his head. They search for him. He flees with his son, and as the story goes, he lives in a cave for 12 years to hide from the Romans. And during that time, he and his son, his name is Eliezer, they study Torah together. The story says that they are buried up to their necks in sand, so they don't have to wear clothes. Their clothes would wear out. They are fed by birds or animals that bring them food. A tree grows right in the cave, a carob tree. So this was a tradition to have for some people to have carobs crew on Lag BaOmer as well. And this is a kind of, you might say, a reproduction of Gan Eden, of the Garden of Eden, right? Where the animals are helping them and they're learning Torah. It's an idyllic pastoral existence. And they're there for 12 years until Eliyahu HaNavi comes and he announces, can someone inform Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that there's no longer a price on his head? He can come out. This is also reminiscent, this story, a little bit of the Moshe story, where Moshe comes back to Egypt when he learns that he's no longer a wanted man after he killed the Egyptian. In any case, he and his son go out. They see people working the field. Israel's an agricultural society, and everything they look at burns up in fire. And they, in a sense, curse and say, look at these people. We've been sitting and learning for 12 years, learning the Torah, which is Chaye Olam. This is a life forever. This is eternal. And they're engaged in Chaye Sha'ah, which is, the everyday life that we have to do to make a living, to till the fields, to plant, and to do our daily work. And Eliyahu, or you can say in a message from God, orders Rashbi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, to go back in the cave. He said, did I free you from the cave so that you can destroy the world? They go back to the cave for 12 months. Some say they go back for 24 months. And when they come out again from the cave, they see that it is Friday, and there's a man running, carrying 2 sheaves of wheat, or 2 bundles of some vegetation. And they say to him, where are you running? Why are you running? And he says, I'm running because it's almost Shabbat. And why are you carrying those 2 sheaves? And he says, I'm going to light 2 fires, 2, as it were, candles. Why 2, says Rashbi? And he answers, Shamor v'zachor et Yom HaShabbat, because you have to light 2 candles for Shabbat, one for Shamor, one for Zachor, to remember, and one for Shamor, to guard the laws of Shabbat. And Rashbi realizes and says, look how righteous people can be. Here is a farmer, and yet he's hurrying to keep Shabbat, and he knows about lighting 2 candles, Shamor v'Zachor, and he has a completely different outlook on the world. The Gemara tells us that, and we spoke about this in Parsha Noach, but to repeat, the rainbow, that there is this custom that we really don't do anymore, but it's associated with Lag BaOmer, about children taking bows and arrows. and playing with a bow and arrow. I don't think we see that anymore, but it's written about in the sources. And the idea comes because the Rashbi is connected to the rainbow. Why? So the bow, the rainbow, because we're told that we know the rainbow comes into view, not necessarily existence. We're told that it always existed, but it comes into view after the flood when God says, I will never destroy the world again, the whole world. Now it says there by flood, but the rabbis say it means in general, the whole world will never be destroyed as it was during the flood. And the symbol of that is the rainbow. So the rainbow is an interesting thing. We make a bracha on it. We're not supposed to gaze too much at it because it also represents the fact that we need God's promise not to destroy the world. But the Gemara says that the rainbow never appeared during the lifetime of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, because if you have someone great enough that God says, I would never destroy a world if a person like this is in it. There are certain unique individuals, we're told, that in their lifetime, they were enough to keep the world alive and in existence, and you didn't need the rainbow for the reminder of God's pledge. The Gemara talks about Chizkiyahu, who was the great king, the holy king, as being one of those people, and also names the members of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah who put together the Sidur, and also Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. So this is another idea connected to this whole story, that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, in a sense, begins by condemning people who lead secular or everyday normal life, instead of just spending all of your time studying Torah. But he comes around to realize that everybody has a purpose in life and that we all have to respect one another's vocation and one another's priorities. And this is the rainbow. The rainbow is that idea of many colors, of many types of people who are all created in God's image and all of whom deserve respect. And so here we see these two stories coming together, that the tragedy in both of them is that this unity between people and this lack of respect one for the other. Maybe it's the secular people who think that those who learn Torah are detached from general society, don't contribute to general society, and even look down upon them, consider them backwards. And maybe it's the religious people who look down on the secular, as Rashbi did at first, and say, you're not contributing to eternal life. You're not studying Torah. You're busy with things that are really of little or no value. And this is the tragedy. This is what happened in the story of Rabbi Akiva. They did not give kavod zelazeh. And this is the story of the Rashbi. And in a sense, that same syndrome is continuing today. The idea of this schism in Jewish life between the secular and the religious, who don't respect one another nearly as much as they should. And I suggest that in thinking about when will we solve this problem, when will we reestablish the Beit HaMikdash and relight the fires of the Mizbeach and bring the offerings again, when I would say when someone who is completely non-observant has a passionate desire to learn Torah, and where somebody who is passionate about Torah and committed to a Torah way of life also fights in the army to make Israel independent and keep Israel independent. And in a sense, just to end on a very positive note, I think if we see this problem as a terrible problem today, and it's reflected in the way we talk about one another. And I've written about this. You can see my article this Friday. Again, the discourse is just really horrendous in the way we relate and talk to one another and respect for one another. But there are signs of hope in that there are many secular people, more and more people who are coming around to appreciate the Torah and form their own, even within the secular community, not necessarily the Baal Tshuva community, but even in the secular community. We see this example of this woman who is leading the study of Daf Yomi on TikTok and on video. And many hundreds of non-religious women are found, not only non-religious, religious women as well, but also even within the non-religious community who are studying Daf Yomi. There are even yeshivot, secular yeshivot. And on the other side, of course, there is hopefully a growing number of people from the Haredi community who are joining the army and who are committing to fight for the state of Israel, to recognize the state of Israel, to be proud of the state of Israel. It's still in its infancy, but I suggest that there are definitely signs of hope that this schism can somehow be overcome and we can have a meeting of the minds. So this is, in a nutshell, this is the hidden and deeper story of the students of Rabbi Akiva who fought with Rabbi Akiva, but it wasn't necessarily them who weren't showing respect, but it was the fact that there were others who didn't respect the fact that they wanted to fight and that they wanted to reestablish the sovereignty and independence of the state of Israel. And in the accompanying story of the Rashbi, Rabbi Akiva's prime student, who also ultimately comes to an understanding that, in effect, Jewish life is a rainbow, and it includes both those who are fighting valiantly for the study of Torah and those who work for a living and who support the country and who are good people who are also in their own way holy in God's eyes. So this is a bit of the background of the story of Sfirat HaOmer, of Lag BaOmer, of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and hopefully that will be a motivation for people to come together and to recognize that every person has infinite worth and is an equally valued member of God's community. So I will stop and thank you all for tuning in. And if anybody has a comment or question, you can unmute yourself and
thank you.
Feel free.
Amen to all that.
Thank
I
you.
tell you, we had in our school where I teach, we had I think it's a privilege to have the secular yeshiva Bina. They came in to teach the 8th grades, Parsha Yichavua, and I was a part of that group. Unbelievable program, unbelievable for kids who knew nothing about anything, how they were just lit up by learning Torah, and then they had to go and teach it to the 7th graders. It's a wonderful program. And
we have to also go the other way. We have to inject within the Haredi community an appreciation for the things that,
education,
to some extent, for secular life, for experiencing God's world and travel and all the things that God provides for us that we should take advantage of. Yes. Anybody else want to make a comment? If not, then I will wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. We should be back next week, same time, same place. Thank you so much to Tal and Emre for being our hosts. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your Lag BaOmer, and we will continue on our march onwards and upwards towards Shavuot. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.